It's December 20th, 2014. And we're going to start out by talking to our Heavenly Family. Our dear Heavenly Family, we thank you so much for the Sabbath rest that we've had. And we thank you for your love and for your intercession for us, for your patience toward us. We thank you for all the truth that you've been sending us. And we just especially thank you that Trent and Teresa were able to get on last night and we were able to have such sweet fellowship with them. I just ask right now that whatever's keeping them from getting on the call, that if it would be your will that they get on, that you would make a way. And I also ask that you would just bless us with your presence. Sister, I ask that you would guide my words and the words of all of us here, that everything that we say and do tonight would be pleasing to you. And I ask that you would richly bless us with your truth. Show us the truth of how much you love us and that you desire for us to be with you forever and that you've called us to be a nation of priests. I just ask that you would shower us with truth tonight and with your love and show us more about your plan for us. Help us to see the wisdom. Help us to see the lessons that we need to learn from this part of history, our history. And we just ask all these things in the name of our brother and sister, the branch, in the sheep. Amen. All right, well, Trent asked for us to do a little research for him because they are not able to get on the internet. And so did anybody find anything about, let's see, he asked us to look up the, the family of Jehoiarib, and also he asked us to look for, and also he asked us to look for,
meaning of Maccabees.
Yeah, the meaning of the Maccabees, thank you. I was trying to pull up my document here. Okay. Yeah, so did anybody find anything?
One website said hammer.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that right now. That's the first thing that I found too. And do you know why they use the word hammer?
No, they didn't explain that. Well,
let me just read this little, I'll read just a little bit of the historical background. And it says, this is from the Jewish Virtual Library, and it says, the Jewish hammer. Though many Jews had been seduced by the virtues of Hellenism, the extreme measures adopted by Antiochus helped unite the people. When a Greek official tried to force a priest named Mattathias to make a sacrifice to a pagan god, the Jew murdered the man. And from what I read in 1 Maccabees, he murdered the man who tried to make the sacrifice, as well as the Greek official who tried to make the man sacrifice to the Greek god. Anyway, and that was Judas and his brother's father. So predictably, Antiochus began reprisals, and Antiochus is Antiochus Epiphanes, and he was the king of the Greek Empire at that time. Antiochus predictably began reprisals, but in 167 BCE, the Jews rose up behind Mattathias and his 5 sons and fought for their liberation. The family of Mattathias became known as the Maccabees from the Hebrew word for hammer, because they were said to strike hammer blows against their enemies. Jews refer to the Maccabees, but the family is more commonly known as the Hasmoneans. But the actuality of it is it was just Judas or Judah who actually had the surname Maccabee. And in Latin, it's translated Maccabeus. So that's why we'll read Judas Maccabeas. And in the version of the Apocrypha that I have, I'm pretty sure it says Maccabeus. Anyway, so yeah, hammer, because they would strike hammer blows against their enemies. And then in Wikipedia, Maccabees, noun, Maccabee, plural noun, Maccabees, members or followers of the family of the Jewish leader Judas Maccabeas. And then it also refers to the 4 books of the Jewish history and theology, of which the first and second are in the Apocrypha and feature Judas Maccabeus. And then singular proper noun, Maccabees, plural noun, the books of the Maccabees. Origin. Late Middle English, from Latin Maccabeus, an epithet applied to Judas, perhaps from Hebrew Maccabet, or hammer, by association with the religious revolt led by Judas. And then, let's see. And of course, Maccabee is the surname that was given to Judah, or Judas, whichever way it's translated. And each of the sons of Mattathias had different surnames. So, it wasn't the Maccabee family, but the followers, the family and the followers became known as the Maccabees. And the name Maccabee is often associated as a synonym for the entire Hasmonean dynasty. But the Maccabees proper were Judah Maccabee and his 4 brothers. That's kind of true. The name Maccabee was a personal epithet of Judah, which means surname, and the later generations were not his direct descendants. One explanation of the name's origins is that it derives from the Aramaic Maccabah, which I thought, now that's interesting. That sounds awfully close to Merkabah, doesn't it?
I thought that too.
Yeah. Okay, so it derives from the Aramaic Maccabah, the hammer, in recognition of Judah's ferocity in battle. The traditional Jewish explanation is that Maccabee, in Hebrew, Maccabee, is an acronym for the Torah verse that was the battle cry of the Maccabees, Mi Kamoka Ba'alim, Yahweh, which means, who is like you among the heavenly powers, Hashem, as well as an acronym for Mattatiyahu Kohen ben Yochanan. The correlating Torah verse, Exodus 15:11, the Song of Moses and the children of Israel by the sea, makes a reference to Elim, with a mundane notion of natural forces, heavenly might, war, and governmental power. The scholar and poet Aaron Kaminka argues that the name is a corruption of Machbanai, a leading commando in the army of King David. So, those are just some ideas. Any other thoughts? Any thoughts on that matter?
They were fearless. Or Judas was anyway, and he had real faith in God's power.
Amen. Yeah, and Roland said something similar to that. Roland, do you mind telling us what you said at the beginning? What you got out of it? You may be
I have to be on mute. I just said that as long as you don't forsake the Lord, He will not forsake us.
Amen. If we do not forsake the Lord, he will not forsake us. Amen. And Judah knew that. That's one thing that was obvious when I was reading this, that he absolutely believed that. You know, because when they were coming up against huge armies and they were greatly outnumbered, you know, he just told his soldiers, you know, say, hey, look, the victory doesn't have anything to do with how many people are in the army. So he said it's all about the Lord. It's all about who our heavenly family wants to win.
Whose side the Lord is on.
Yeah, whose side the Lord is on. And they knew that to be on the Lord's side, they had to be loyal to the Lord and to uphold righteousness. That's the lesson I learned today. You know, it's so important. You know, these people like the Maccabees and so many other people that even were martyred for their faith, you know, they loved righteousness above everything else. Any other thoughts on the word or the name Maccabees? The other thing that Trent wanted us to look at is the name Jehoiarib. And let's see, in 1 Maccabees 2, the reason that came up is that in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, in those days arose Mattathias, the son of John, the son of Simeon, a priest of the sons of Jehoiarib. And here they use the word Joarib, which is synonymous with the name Jehoiarib. And it just depends on what translation you're reading from. From Jerusalem, and dwelt in Modin, sorry. And so here we find out that this family is related to Jehoiarib from Jerusalem. And so Trent wants to know what significance that has. And so did anybody find anything that they want to share about Jehoiarib or Jehoiarib, different ways to pronounce it?
So we don't really know what their real name was.
Well, they're just different kind of versions of the name, depending on what translation you're reading and what I can tell.
No, I mean the Maccabees was just Judas' surname. It wasn't the family name.
Right. Welcome.
Hey guys, it's Teresa, and Trent will be right back. He just went in to stoke the fire.
Oh, praise our heavenly family.
So how is everyone?
We're good.
Well, hello. I was hard to say happy Sabbath, everyone, but I guess it's over for everyone by now. But hope everyone had a good Sabbath. Are you guys in the middle of Maccabees, or what are you guys doing tonight?
We were going to start reading in Maccabees, but we were just kind of looking at, we had just talked about what we found out about the name Maccabees, and we were just getting into the family Jehoiarib. Cool.
Well, hopefully Trent will be back soon. He'll be interested in that.
Yeah, we can certainly backtrack. We thought, well, we knew that you had read the Maccabees, and so, you know, we thought since it's kind of a long book, might not be a bad idea just to go ahead and start plowing through it. So, but we hadn't even started reading it. Actually, we actually talked for quite some time and had some good fellowship and just started the recording at about 7:35.
Okay, well, Trent just got back, too, so we're both here.
Hey, guys.
Hey. Glad you're here.
She was sharing what she found out about the word Maccabee.
Okay, I'm wondering what it is because I came across something today, too. What did you find?
Well, Leroy found the word hammer, and that's what I found in the Jewish Virtual Library. The family of Mattathias became known as the Maccabees from the Hebrew word hammer. And then in Wikipedia, let's see, it says the members or followers of the family of the Jewish leader Judas Maccabeas, and we talked about the fact that that was his surname, but that his followers became known as that as well. And the 4 Jewish books of the Jewish history and theology. And the origin is late Middle English from Latin Maccabeus, an epithet applied to Judas, perhaps from Hebrew Maccabet, or hammer, by association with a religious revolt led by Judas. And then, let's see. And the later, I'm sorry, let me go back here just a second. The name Maccabee is often used as a synonym for the entire Hasmonean dynasty, but the Maccabees proper were Judah Maccabee and his 4 brothers. And the name Maccabee was a personal epithet of Judah, and the later generations were not his direct descendants. One explanation of the name's origin is that it derives from the Aramaic Maccabah, which means the hammer, in recognition of Judah's ferocity in battle. The traditional Jewish explanation is that Maccabee, which in Hebrew is Maccabi, is an acronym for the Torah verse that was the battle cry of the Maccabees, Mi Kamoka Ba'elim Yahweh, which means who is like you among the heavenly powers, Hashem, as well as an acronym for Matitayahu Cohen ben Yochanan. The correlating Torah verse, Exodus 15:11, the song of Moses and the children of Israel by the sea, makes a reference to Elim with a mundane notion of natural forces, heavenly might, or governmental powers. The scholar and poet Aaron Kaminka argues that the name is a corruption of Machbanai, a leading commando in the army of King David. But I thought it was really interesting that it derives, possibly from the Aramaic Maccabah.
Yeah, that's interesting. With what I found today wasn't actually anything of a positive declaration of what the word Maccabee comes from. What I came across was actually I was just reading some from I think it was volume 13 of Antiquities of the Jews, which is, the series, the primary series that Josephus, the first century historian, wrote. And because he covers the same story, the same history of the Maccabees as is recorded in 1st and 2nd and 4th Maccabees. So he goes through that same history. And so I was reading that, and then there were some footnotes in the version that I was reading, and it mentioned something about the rabbinical tradition of the word Maccabee coming from an acronym. And it was basically saying that that's not a really likely scenario, but it didn't offer any other explanation. So when you mentioned about coming from the Hebrew word for hammer, that seems a lot more likely. And it's interesting, too, how all of Mattathias' sons had these surnames. And it's kind of like, it's definitely different than a last name in how we think of it today. It's just like it's a given name. It's a name that's given to someone that they're kind of known as that.
Mm-hmm.
Descriptive.
Yeah.
Kind of the American Indians do.
Yeah, that's not a bad way, a bad comparison. Yeah, that seems to be somewhat like it is. Yeah, so I'm glad that you guys came across that. And
she was just about to start sharing about, I forget the name now, the how. What was the next thing you were about to cover, Carol?
The name Jehoiarib or Jehoiarib.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Okay, what I found was, and in my version of the Apocrypha, which comes from Latin, I believe, it says Jehoiarib, and but it can be Jehoiarib, and from what I found, that they are synonymous. That it's the same thing, just depending on the origin of the language. But and stop me if you don't agree, or if it doesn't sound right. But I look in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, and it says Jehoiarib, and the pronunciation there is Jehoiarib. And in the King James Version, it's Jarib or Jarib. Ancestor of Mattathias, 1 Maccabees 14:29, given as Jehoiarib in the King James Version of 1 Maccabees 2:1. He was the chief of the first of the 24 courses of the priests in the reign of David. Varieties of the name are Jarib, Joarib, and Jehoiarib. Jarib, Jehoiarib, and Jehoiarib. And that's from 1 Chronicles 24:7, where it talks about Jehoiarib being the chief of the first of the 24 courses. And then in Bible Hub, Jehoiarib, it says in parentheses, God will contend, is the name of two biblical persons. And so in Nehemiah 11:5, it's the ancestor of Messiah, the son of Baruch, who was one of those to resettle Jerusalem after the return from Babylon. So in a couple of places, it talks about Jehoiarib, being among the priests who were the exiles who resettled Jerusalem in 1 Chronicles 9:10, Nehemiah 12:6, and 12:19. It talks about the leaders, the priestly leaders of the families, and in Nehemiah 11:10. And then in 1 Chronicles 24:7 is where it talks about him being, them casting lots, and Jehoiarib being chosen to be the first of the priests. In the priestly service. And then it says the head of the family of priests at the time of the return to Babylon. Okay. He was one of the men of understanding sent by Ezra. And this is interesting, the same name, it might be a different person, but also in Nehemiah 12:19, Ezra was looking for a man of understanding, and also he's called a teacher. But then also, he was one of the priests that went back and resettled. So I don't know if it's, that maybe he was a teacher before he went back, or if it's a different person.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty much the same information that I was coming across as well. There's the different versions of the same name, the ones that you gave there, and at least the two people, one in the time of David and then one in the days of Nehemiah, that go by that name, both of which are priests. And it seems like, the one thing that I was trying to find out is if what line of priests did that come through? Because we know that there's the line of, there was like the three different families of priests, and then there was the children of Aaron, and then from Aaron there was the two lines, one through Eleazar and the other through, I think it's Ithamar, if I'm remembering correctly, Eleazar and Ithamar, and so there was those two lines of priests which came through Aaron, and I was just wondering if it can be traced biblically as to which line Jehoiarib came through. Like what is the lineage of Jehoiarib? And I don't know if you're able to find that or not.
I was looking for that, and the only thing I found in regard to that is, and by the way, this is kind of interesting. In Hitchcock's Bible Names Dictionary, Jehoiarib means chiding or multiplying of the Lord, and it also means fighting, according to Hitchcock's Bible Names. And in Smith's Bible Dictionary, it means whom Jehovah defends. In Smith's Bible Dictionary, a third meaning, I guess you would say, it says a Shilonite, that is probably descendant of Shelah, the son of Judah. And that's from Nehemiah 11:5.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and then so in Easton's Bible Dictionary, it also says, as one of the examples given of the word used, it says Nehemiah 11:5, a descendant of Judah. And then Ezra 8:16, like I mentioned before, a man of, quote, man of understanding, whom Ezra sent to bring ministers for the house of God. And in Hebrew, it is pronounced Jehoiarib, which means Yahweh pleads or contends. And number one, teacher of Ezra's time. Number two, a Judahite, Nehemiah 11:5 again, a reference to the tribe of Judah. And then, of course, in Nehemiah 12:6. And then in the Strong's Hebrew, transliteration again, Jehoiarib, the Lord contends. Is there anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the reason why I'm interested to find out the lineage is because one of the things that is debated in terms of the history of the Maccabees is whether or not Jonathan, who is one of the sons of Mattathias, he's the one who ruled after Judas Maccabeas, he was his brother, and then also their other brother Simon, and then his son John, if they were legitimate high priests or not. Because they, some people said that they weren't, but then Maccabees, the books of Maccabees themselves, seem to portray them in a very good light, and like they were really the preservers of truth. And so, one of the things that's a question is, okay, well, we know that they were of the priesthood, and looking at the line of, Jehoiarib going back to David, it was the first course of, he was the head of the first course of the priests, and the high priest at that time was Zadok, and the descendants of Zadok were to have the high priesthood. And so the question is, was Jehoiarib descendant of Zadok, or was, are Mattathias and his sons, were they descended from Zadok, or were they not? Were they from some other priestly order? And, that's, I guess, one of the questions that it would be good at some point for us to understand the answer to. And one way that might also be able to be solved is to find out who else descended from Jehoiarib and if any of them were high priests. I think I was coming across something about somewhere along the line, Zadok coming through, I think it was from Jehoiarib, and Zadok went into captivity, and then his, captivity in Babylon, and then his son was Joshua the high priest in Zechariah. And so it's like, if there's a connection between that line and Jehoiarib, then it shows a connection between Zadok and the line of Jehoiarib, because, the line of the high priests up until after the Babylonian captivity was still Zadokite high priesthood.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I found was that there were several, Jewish sites, I would say, that believed that in Nehemiah 11:10, instead of Jediah and his son Jehoiarib, that it should probably be read Jediah and Jehoiarib. As when you compare that with 1 Chronicles 9:10, it says Jediah and Jehoiarib. So, but that doesn't mean that Jehoiarib was not Jediah's son.
Right.
Yeah. So,
I guess these are things we'll have to look more into, and as we learn more about the important history of the Maccabees, I'm sure some of these things will be made clear. So, am I understanding correctly that you guys haven't started to read from Maccabees itself yet?
that is correct.
Okay. And I'm just curious, have you all been able to read a little bit of it on your own time?
Yeah, I think most everybody has read at least some of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I was able to finish First Maccabees. I guess it was last night or this morning.
This morning.
Yeah, this morning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I realized that I wasn't familiar with that part of history.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just so many parallels to the time of the falling away. That's just amazing. And Roland has a really good comment about it, something that he got out of it. Roland, do you mind again? It's really cool.
Yes, I just learned from the Maccabees. I only have chapter 1 Maccabees 1 and 2. I don't have 3 and 4. But if we are faithful to the Lord, He will not forsake us.
Amen.
Amen. Was that, I missed part of that. What was he saying?
He was saying that he has Maccabees 1 and 2, but not 3 and 4. So what he got out of it was, if we're faithful to the Lord, He will not forsake us. Is that right, Roland?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's 100% the truth. That's one of the overall lessons I was gleaning from that too. That really, in the history of the Maccabees, one of the big controversies, really, it started with people deciding really to be willing to forsake the true religion, and then others being unwilling to, and kind of the consequences of that, and what happened when people decided to go contrary to the law of our Heavenly Family. and versus what happened when they decided to, really stay strict and straight in their principles.
Amen. Well, should we start reading?
I'm up for it.
Mm-hmm. We've got our books here. We're ready whenever you are.
Okay. Well, does that mean that you want to start reading, or are you, maybe it's difficult sitting there in the truck, but...
No, I wasn't saying that for that reason, just letting you know that, not to wait on us. No rush, just whenever everyone's ready, but we're ready whenever you are, for whatever.
Okay.
I see that we're starting at the beginning of 1 Maccabees.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and start reading. Chapter 1. And it happened after that Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim, had smitten Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece, and made many wars and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through the ends of the earth and took spoils of many nations, insomuch that the earth was quiet before him. Whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. And he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, who became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdoms among them, while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years, and then died. And his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death, they all took crowns upon themselves. So did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been a hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. In those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, Let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein, that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of heathen. Whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised, and forsook the holy covenant, and joined themselves to the heathen, and were sold to do mischief. And by the way, Trent, I don't know if you were inside or not, but last night I was talking about the fact that gymnasium has to do with, young men that were trained in sports and games, which, of course, provided diversion for the people. And then it was also a place where philosophers came, and so they sat around and philosophized about vain ideas that were contrary to our heavenly family. But gymno means naked, and so it's interesting that these young men were naked, and the gymnasiums were always a tribute to a particular god, like Hercules and maybe Hermes and another one. But, the emphasis was on, worshiping, and so they exercised in the nude, and they played these games in the nude. It was all about worshiping the beauty of the creation rather than the creator.
Right.
That makes sense in the context here of, mentioning in context of the gymnasium that they removed the marks of circumcision. It's like, okay, well, why did they mention that? Well, it's because they were exposed. You could see it. It was obvious.
Exactly. And they wanted to be like everybody else. They didn't want to, look odd.
And this whole thing with the introduction to this in Maccabees, I just want to point out kind of the importance of this whole thing in regard to the overall view of history. And I know we talked about this a little bit last night, but it's just amazing to me how it's like, wow, where we leave off in the Protestant Old Testament and then where it picks up at the beginning of the New Testament, so much happened in between those two parts of history that it's just like, wow, it's missing such a large and important part of the story. And, here it's picking up, with Alexander the Great.
Mm-hmm.
Right after, it mentioned in verse 1 of chapter 1, after he had defeated King Darius of the Persians and the Medes, he succeeded him as king. So it's really dovetailing with the biblical characters that we are already familiar with, and then just moving on forward and seeing, okay, well, this is what happened. You had the Jews back in Jerusalem, or at least however many returned from Babylonian captivity. You have them there. We know that there was some form of corruption according to Malachi and according to Zechariah. And it's like, okay, but there was this Reformation, and what really happened after that? Well, the Greeks began to rule. And how did that affect God's people? And here you see it. You see a division taking place, those who are, first, of course, this is mentioning those who were unfaithful to the covenant, who went to go make a covenant with the Gentiles and go after the Greek ordinances. And it's just, the whole progression of the book, it's really, I think it's just really important and really good to understand the history that forms so much of the background of the New Testament.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting. I really didn't know very much about it at all. By the way, I want to say welcome to the latest person that called in.
It's Lynn. I'm back.
All right. Well, we're in First Maccabees, and we're at chapter. We just finished chapter 15. Verse 15 in chapter 1. So, any other comments?
I just wanted to comment on the last thing that you said about how, you said that you didn't really know anything about this history. And I think that is just, it's been the case for all of us until recently, and the majority of Christianity is still just completely ignorant of this history. And, looking today, I mentioned earlier how I was reading a little bit of Josephus's Antiquity of the Jews. And it's like, man, Josephus, he was contemporary with people like Paul and John and Peter and, many of the apostles. I mean, he was an eyewitness to the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. And just skimming, he has all these volumes of history that he had written, and it's like, oh, wow, there is so much, and there's a lot going into what had taken place since the time, from the time of the Maccabean revolt. He covers that history and goes through even discussing what took place after that Maccabees doesn't discuss. And it's like, these are things that we need to become familiar with, because, it is possible for someone to understand a lot of the New Testament without some of these things, but there is so much more that cannot be understood without some of these things. I mean, even just the fact that we get to the New Testament and all of a sudden we're reading things about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and all these different guys, and it's like, man, you didn't read any of these terms in the Old Testament. Who are these people? Where did they come from? How did they come about? What's the difference between one group and the other? What was Christ's relation and John the Baptist's relation and the different apostles' relationship to each of these different groups, you know? And it really, you know, understanding this is going to help us far more than we currently know. It really is.
You know, when you mentioned the name Josephus, that reminded me, I came across this when I was researching Jehoiarib. And this is from the virtual Jewish Bible. The virtual Jewish library.
Okay.
It's an online library. But it says the Hasmoneans descended from the Jehoiarib family, which lived at first in Jerusalem and later, possibly during the persecution of Antiochus Epiphanes, moved to Modin. A later descendant of the family was the historian Josephus.
Oh, he was descended from the family.
Yeah, that's what it says here.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wasn't familiar with that one way or the other. I know Josephus records a little bit more, you know, about the Hasmoneans. And, you know, just for those who don't know, Hasmoneans and Maccabeans, it's pretty much the same thing. Hasmoneans, they were called Hasmoneans after the grandfather or great-grandfather of Mattathias, and whose name was, I think it was Hasmon or something like that. And so those that came from that family were known as Hasmoneans. And so that's like, you hear of the Hasmonean dynasty, and that's a large part of what people call Second Temple Judaism. Second Temple Judaism goes from the days of Zerubbabel and, you know, the first return of Jews after the Babylonian captivity. It goes from then all the way up until 70 AD. And there's a lot that went on during that time. So, yeah, that's interesting about Josephus. It would be interesting, you know, in reading some of the Antiquities of the Jews, I could see how much he was following First Maccabees in recording the history, but then he also had other information that he was drawing from. He had other sources. So he was quoting, you know, as we go through and read First Maccabees, we'll see it's talking about people like Apollonius and Nicanor and Antiochus and these different people. And there's different things that Josephus had available to him, like letters written between Antiochus and Nicanor, and he actually quotes these letters. And so, you know, there's just we have such an abundance of information at our fingertips that will help us to understand the truth.
I just want to say, too, that I was really struck by the Greco influence in our culture, and I can see why the devil doesn't want us to get our hands on this information, because it really sheds a light on so many things in our culture that are just, they're evil, you know, and we don't see them as such. You know, like I was thinking about, I mentioned this last night, sorry to repeat myself, but like, you know, just it's such a part of our culture, sports. We get our kids involved in sports and the games and the, you know, diversion of watching them, and it's just, it's right out of the Grecian culture, and it's all kinds of wrong. I mean, it's a big waste of time, and it
totally
it causes kids to get a big head, and then other kids to feel bad, if they don't have the ball skills or whatever, But there are just so many things that I can see in our culture that are completely antithetical to the religion of our Heavenly Family.
And it's so seeing how the Greek, it's it is amazing seeing how much it's affecting us today, and then it's amazing also to see how much it affected them back in that day, because most people in reading the New Testament don't realize how different the Judaism of that day was as compared to the Judaism of a few hundred years before, like what we read in the latest parts of the Old Testament. It was so different because prior to that, I mean, sure, the Jews had been influenced to varying degrees by some of the other cultures around them, like Canaanite cultures and the other ancient Mesopotamian cultures, whether, from Babylon or Assyria or whatever the case may be. They have had, some sort of influence from these other cultures, but those other cultures were still, they're such ancient cultures that had roots going back to really ancient times. And kind of the further disconnected you came from those ancient times, the more kind of off base you became. And so when it came to the influence from the Greek culture, that's where you have all these different immaterial things coming in. And, because by this point, I mean, Plato, he had already done his, all of his philosophy and died hundreds of years before the time of Christ. And so these Greek philosophies were so influencing what was taking place at that time. And I know another figure of history that is an important figure in this whole Second Temple Judaism thing is actually Philo. He lived from about 20 BC till 50 AD. So he actually lived during the time of Christ. And he was a Jew from Alexandria, Egypt. And he was very much into Greek philosophy. So he was a Hellenized Jew, which just means Greekized, basically. And, when we can see kind of some of the perspectives that he had, it shows us how much that Greek thinking was influencing the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the different gymnasiums were they were dedicated to the different gods, but they were, they kind of had a patron philosopher of each one. Like Socrates frequented one, and Plato frequented another one, and it seems like maybe they even organized them.
Right.
So, with the idea that, okay, let's get healthy, and that sounds great. Let's get healthy, physically fit. Physical fitness is health. Like you can see that in our physical fitness program in the schools and, that kind of stuff. That sounds good. But now let's have mixed bathing, or not mixed, communal bathing. And then let's throw in, okay, let's sit around all day and, talk Greek philosophy. So that's all thrown in. It's all mixed up together. Can't really be separated. And it's the same thing with our culture.
Yeah. What a world we live in.
Yeah. Well, knowledge is power, though. All right, should I read on?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I was just talking about, just reading that they have a place of exercise. They built a place of exercise at Jerusalem. According to the customs of the heathen, made themselves uncircumcised and forsook the Holy Covenant and joined themselves to the heathen and were sold to do mischief, which just, they weren't sold literally, but they were bound to do mischief. Now, when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have the dominion of 2 realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen, and a great navy, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him, and fled, and many were wounded to death. Thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof. And after that Antiochus had smitten Egypt, he returned again in the 143rd year, and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary, and took away the golden altar, and the candlestick of light, and all the vessels thereof, and the table of the showbread, and the pouring vessels, and the phials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crowns, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He took also the silver and the gold and the precious vessels. Also he took the hidden treasures which he found. And when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre and spoken very proudly. Therefore there was a great mourning in Israel, in every place where they were, so that the princes and elders mourned, the virgins and the young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. The land also was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the cities of Judah, who came into Jerusalem with a great multitude, and spake peaceable words unto them, for all was deceit. For when they had given him credence, he fell suddenly upon the city, and smote it very sore, and destroyed much people of Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire, and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the women and children took they captive, and possessed the cattle. Then builded they the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. And they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. They stored it also with armor and victuals, and when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, and so they became a sore snare. For it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary, and an evil adversary to Israel. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled it, insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them, whereupon the city was made an habitation of strangers, and become strange to those that were born in her, and her own children left her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. As had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people. Well, this is sounding so familiar. And everyone should leave his laws, so that all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters of messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple. and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beasts. But they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. In the selfsame manner wrote he to his whole kingdom, and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice, city by city. Then many of the people were gathered unto them, to wit, every one that forsook the law, and so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee for succor. Now the 15th day of the month Sislu, in the 140 and 50th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rent in places the books of the law which they found, they burnt them with fire. And wheresoever was found any of the book of the Testament, or if any consented to the law, the king's commandment was that they should be put to death. Thus did they by their authority unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities. Now the 25th day of the month they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. I think that's interesting. Is that a coincidence? The 25th day, being that Christmas is the 25th day of the month?
Well, I know that it ended up, the 25th day ended up being the same day 3 years later that it was purified.
Right.
That things were, that the purification finished, and that they were able to resume the temple services. I don't know one way or the other if there's any connection to the 25th day.
Maybe it's a favorite number of the wicked God.
We have to consider also that December, the Roman calendar, Greco-Roman calendar of January, February, March, et cetera, 25th day of December is a totally different day in God's calendar of a Hebrew month.
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course. But I was just thinking it's interesting that 25th day, that's a high holy day. It's a different month. But, numbers are numbers, and, the wicked gods are really into numbers, just like our heavenly family are. They have their own,
Yeah, and wants to counterfeit everything.
Yeah. Okay, this is getting to the part that just really makes me cry. At which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised, and they hanged the infants about their necks and rifled their houses and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing. Wherefore they chose rather to die, that they might not be defiled with meat, and that they might not profane the holy covenant. So then they died. And there was very great wrath on Israel.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible. I mean, when we read these accounts, this historical account, do we read it and just think, oh, that's awful, and go on? Or do we read it and we think, that actually happened, and they did, they suffered these things because they would not compromise principle. They would not knowingly disobey the commands of Yahweh. And that is pretty serious. Should we
Yeah,
be
I mean, these women, they knew what the consequence was.
Yep.
And they did it anyway, and they knew that they would rather follow righteousness and stand for righteousness than even to save the lives of their babies.
Yep.
Yeah, it is truly incredible. The different stories of the martyrs in these Maccabean histories. It's just, it reminds me of Ellen White saying about, how we should rather die than commit a sin. And I think Hada says something like that too. And, it's just terrible what took place, but I take comfort in knowing that the special resurrection that took place when Christ rose was largely, if not wholly, martyrs from, of course, prior to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, some of these very women and infants may have been resurrected with Christ on that day.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, another thing that it makes me think about is the fact that those forces that hate the sanctuary service and everything that it stands for and the power that it provides by connecting heaven and earth is still alive and well, and is watching with great interest.
Very true.
Not that I'm saying that we should be frightened or anything, but we need to be aware of that, and recognize that. I mean, if they didn't have the sanctuary service going on, that connection was lost. And the same thing now, and the thing that strikes terror into all the other nations and the wicked gods behind them is this priesthood, that is reconnecting heaven with earth. Because that's how the kingdoms of the earth become the kingdoms of our heavenly family.
Amen. Yeah, it is
exciting.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. Yeah, the devil is active, and history repeats itself, and the victories which our heavenly family wrought for these people in old time, they will again work in the earth to an even greater degree. And it is really, really incredible realizing that what we have before us is so much greater than we could possibly realize.
Yeah, I mean, it's sure a lot different than I thought religion was. I mean, and with all of us, I think, what we were living, even those of us who, were pretty amazed that we've been blessed with all of this incredible enlightenment and knowledge that, 99% of people on the planet had no idea about. I mean, that is amazing. But yet, it just keeps getting more and more astounding. And it's so humbling to me. I mean, today ever since I've really been reading this and listening to the studies from last year, it just really humbles me. I mean, I'm like, wow, what do I think I'm doing here?
Yeah, no, it is, these sorts of things, our Heavenly Family showing us this whole thing of what, the truth behind Scripture canon and things like that. It really is humbling, showing us how little we know. And, wow. Yeah, just considering everything that our Heavenly Family has placed before us in terms of what this message is here to offer, and the call to priesthood, and seeing how everything here is revolving largely around that. It's just, it really kind of brings it home to us that we have really no other option but then to dive right into it, to learn, acquire the knowledge that we have lost, and to really acquire the knowledge of salvation, the gospel, as it really is, to really understand it and to move forward in righteousness. And there is just, seeing what our Heavenly Family did in the days of the Maccabees, reading these different victories is amazing. It is amazing what had been done. And even reading, some of these things, it quotes from the letters from people from other nations. And you can see how they viewed the Jews, and they saw how amazingly these victories were being won. And it's like, wow, what we are moving forward into is such a big picture. And we need to be able to stand in a fearful day. Teresa and I have been reading a proverb a day. And it's just like having, with the Proverbs, once you get to, I guess, Proverbs chapter 10, it's just sayings that aren't necessarily connected with one another. It's just individual sayings put into a collection. And so, we're reading one a day, and it's just something as we're going through the things that we need to do the day, that during the day we can contemplate this saying. And today, the saying, I think it was Proverbs chapter 20, verse 4.
Yes.
And it basically says that a sluggard does not plow in the autumn. And when time comes to harvest, or therefore, when harvest comes, he looks and sees nothing. And it's just reminding me of how it's like, man, this is the time that we have to work the ground of our hearts. And that's one of the things, the earth is a symbol of our heart. And, the parable of sowing the seed and different things like that. There's different examples of that. But plowing our hearts is like, digging up the deeper soil and just, self-examination, really digging deep within ourselves and allowing the Spirit to search ourselves out. And it's like we have right now a work to do in self-examination and in learning the truth, entering into the school of Christ, education, and if we don't do it now, the time will come where we will be expected before heaven to bear fruit of righteousness, which is all the fruits of the Spirit, and which is being able to speak the truth. And if we haven't learned the truth, And if we haven't gone through an experience of true conversion, how will we stand? The day before us is, alas, the day is great, and there's none like it, for it is even the time of Jacob's trouble. We have some rough circumstances before us, and we have this time now to prepare. And it's just, looking at this, it's like, okay, you had this whole Greek culture and everything influencing the Jews. Then you had Antiochus come in and, making these laws and forbidding people to, from worshiping in the right way and causing people, or, basically desecrating the ceremonial service and doing everything that he did. And it's like, man, how is it that someone in that day could stand for the truth? And, once going into chapter 2 of 1 Maccabees, you see the people who stood for truth. And they preserved the scriptures. They cared about truth. And it's just like they had to have some sort of preparation ahead of time so that they could meet those circumstances. And right now we are in a time where there is much mercy. And I do believe it is important that we avail ourselves of it.
Amen.
Amen. One thing that I've learned in the conversations I've been having with our sister and the desiring and speaking to her about my own particular situation in regard to salvation is that, and she's been showing me some deep things, but this is what I learned, is that if I don't believe that I deserve to die, then I don't know enough yet. She hasn't shown me enough, or I don't believe it. Because, we do deserve to die. And, it's only when we see that, I believe, that we accept the death to self and realize that Christ already died for us. And that we don't have to physically die, But if I still think that there's something good about me, then I don't see myself in reality. And then, it's hard to say, okay, yeah, I want to be crucified with Christ. But no, we don't really. Not unless we see the reality of ourselves.
That is so true. It really is, because we can't walk around with a sense of entitlement, or with a sense of, this whole thing of living in sin and not seeing that we deserve to die is really where Lucifer went off track anyway, in thinking that he could have life apart from our heavenly family. It's kind of the whole self-existence thing. And that is how Lucifer basically ended up claiming to be God, because he's claiming to be self-existent, to have life apart from our heavenly family. And if we see that our sins have separated us from them, and yet we go on living anyways, it's really the same old sin going back to the father of lies. But it's so beautiful, because it's like, wow, when you can see that, that's when you see that every day that we wake up with breath in our lungs is the love of our Heavenly Family. It's their mercy and it's their long suffering, saying, hey, even though you deserve to die, I am preserving your life to give you an opportunity to choose. And that right there shows us that we can choose. Everything really is calculated to teach us the lessons of truth. Everything works together for good to those who love God. And that's, reading more and more of Ellen White, she definitely emphasizes the need. She says that it is impossible for someone to grasp a hold of Christ by faith while their mind is constantly educating itself to be concerned about self. It's like, we need to totally engage our mind in the truth, and the truth shall set us free. And then when we see the truth, we'll have something to place our faith in, and then we can really grasp a hold of Christ in faith and be justified. So, I really appreciated what you were just saying there, Carol.
Well, we haven't gotten very far, but does anyone have any comments? Anything at all?
I'll mention something here, because I don't think that, we're definitely not going to get to the end of the Hanukkah story tonight. But I just wanted to mention it. Maybe you guys have already talked about this before we made it on, but basically it's chapters 1 to 4 that actually tell you the story of Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, what we're in right now to celebrate. And so if everyone could make it a point to read those first 4 chapters, and of course in 2nd Maccabees it talks about it as well, but as far as 1st Maccabees is concerned, it's the first 4 chapters. And we do, of course, recommend reading the whole thing, because there's so much more to the story that goes beyond just simply Hanukkah. But the first 4 chapters definitely, I think in reading those, it will prompt people to want to know more of the history, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's 10 minutes after 9, and so I don't know if we want... What?
Wait a minute. I guess it's time to close off. I want to ask Trent and Teresa a question.
Okay.
Last night while I was on the call, I got a call, and I've stopped by the Springfield Church a few times, and now that I've come by, they're going to send me a letter for me to sign and send back, and I haven't read what the letter is, but based on what Winston said, that consists of me recanting my belief or recanting something. So I haven't got the letter yet. I haven't read it. So I don't know exactly what they're going to want me to do.
Well, we'll be praying for you, Dad. I know this isn't a fun thing to go through, but I think it'll be a blessing in the long run.
Well, it may not be anything I can sign. You know, if they got the wrong kind of stuff on there, I won't be able to sign it. I'll just send it back and say sorry. You know, I don't recant the flesh. You know.
Hey, and you know, some of the other things that are encouraging is thinking back to some of the examples of people in the past who have been told to recant, like Martin Luther. And it's just like, he just couldn't recant. He just could not recant. And man, like what a difference he made just by standing up for truth as he understood it. And then you have even in these books of the Maccabees, I think it's in 2nd Maccabees and also in 4th Maccabees, it tells the story of this one guy, Eleazar, and they were trying to persuade him to compromise, not even just to fully recant, but to compromise. You know, they were forcing these Jews to eat swine's flesh, and he just wouldn't do it. And he was going to get tortured to death if he didn't. And then they were saying to him, like, okay, well, here's this other meat, just we'll pretend that it's swine's flesh. And because they were trying to help him, and he wouldn't do it because he did not want to give even the impression of breaking the law. And it was just like, wow, you know, he stood so firm for truth, and he died with the hope of the resurrection, you know. And it's like, wow, reading these stories and seeing how people have gone through these trials before, and most of all, our brother himself, Christ, you know, going through the greatest trials and temptations any human will ever go through. And it's like, there's just a lot of courage, you know. And when we are weak, they are made strong, and they can do so much through someone who is being trodden underfoot by the, you know, religious leadership or political leadership or whatever the case may be in different circumstances. But it's a witnessing opportunity for sure.
Hey, Dad and Mom, I'm going to say goodbye. I've got to run into the house and take care of some things on the stove.
We actually should go. We're both getting tired, and it's getting cold out here. So.
But just wanted to say I love you guys.
It's good to hear you. It's been a blessing to have you guys on with us. Well, does anyone want to pray?
I will.
Okay, great.
Yes, Heavenly Family, I just want to thank you for being able to be on here again tonight. Thank you for bringing us all together and for the opportunity to look into this history of our people, basically, with the Maccabees. And thank you so much for recording these things so that we can look back and be encouraged by their example and what they went through. And I want to ask Heavenly Family that as we continue to move forward, even with the threats all around us from various angles, that each one of us would be strengthened and encouraged, and that we would keep our eyes stayed upon you and be strengthened to do your work. We're not sure what this letter will be about, but whatever it is, we just want to ask that in the end your will would be accomplished, and that these people in the church there
would be blessed with your love in their hearts. Thank you for your many blessings, Heavenly Family, and please continue to guide us closer and